All right, guys. So thank you for coming. A little bit of background on what I've got what's going on and who I am is I started an Asterisk-based VoIP company in 2004. We ran it up until this year, and we sold to Jive Communications. Since then, we started a security company, based on firewalls, things like that. During that entire time period, 10 years, we had only one breach. In the last 8 years, we only took one outage. So, I mean, we really struggled and really focused on security. And so I kind of want to tell you about what we're seeing with the new security company and the things that we're seeing out there, the changes in the marketplace, and kind of also get a feel for what you guys see and what's going on in your world. So I guess you guys can't all answer that, but I'm guessing you guys are all pretty technical. Is there anybody in here not running Asterisk? Okay, cool. Can you guys raise your hands? Who's like a hosted provider in here? Okay, and the rest of you guys are premise providers, I'm guessing? Okay. All right, so just kind of went through that. So SIP attacks over the last couple years. The traditional stuff everybody knows is toll fraud. It's been going on since the 80s. It's still going on. We've deployed a system to kind of monitor what's going on, and in 2007, we only saw about 15 attacks. I mean, it was really, really, really low. In 2010, it increased. In 2012, continued to increase. This year, we've seen by far more attacks than any other year previous. And a little bit more kind of background. I've done some consulting for the government and some other pieces, law enforcement. And what's going on here is you guys are hearing about all the security breaches, all the credit card thefts. What they're doing is they're taking those credit cards and they're buying rack space accounts. They're buying these just hosted accounts, paying a year in advance, and they're setting up scanners. And the scanners are going out checking for any vulnerabilities. They're looking for SIP, they're looking for DNS, they're looking for anything that might be out there that might be something that they can do. Some of them aren't doing anything with that information. Some of them are actively trying to gain access to your switch. But the problem that we're seeing here is that you probably don't even know if you're open and you've been tagged. Even if you just have port 5060 open, you've been tagged. And they may come back and do something with it later, but they're just trying to get an inventory and information. So other type of things that we're seeing right now, DNS, DDoS attacks. It's the easiest way to take down a SIP switch. If you guys are using DNS, SRV, and things like that properly, it's by far one of the easiest ways to take down a hosted provider, especially if you don't have the bandwidth or if you're not null routing the system. Again, usual toll fraud, dialer abuse and harassment. What they're doing once they get a hold of your SIP credentials is a lot of active dialer, active just trying to peg people. A lot of things we say is set up auto attendants and things like that to kind of defer a lot of the type of activity. We don't see it so much anymore. It used to be really big, especially in the 80s and 90s when that was really the only thing you could do with a VoIP switch, a regular switch. But now with the VoIP stuff, they can do a lot more and they can compromise a lot more items. Caller ID spoofing. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Like I said, I got a lot of questions for you guys. SRTP, that was a question I wanted to ask. How many people are actually actively using SRTP right now? Okay. That's what I thought. How many people are planning on doing it? Can anybody answer why they haven't done it yet? Most people aren't using it right now. And the reason behind it is it's very complex to set up. So the people that raise their hand that say they're actively using it right now, what are you guys provisioning your devices with? Okay, so it's a little bit more secure, right? But so what about like traditional phones? How are the people that raise their hand, how are you provisioning your devices? HTTP, TFTP, HTTPS, I mean, you guys are using certificates. How are you doing that? And the reason I ask is it's so complex right now to do it, and then you also, the customer support aspect behind it is absolutely insane. So everybody talks, oh, well, voice over IP isn't secure, voice over IP isn't this. But if any of you worked in the 90s and 80s in the traditional telephone world, if you put on a butt set and walked into a mall, you could walk into any junction box, put in a recording device, listen to phone calls. It was easy. And so when people tell me they're like, oh, voice over IP isn't secure, well, I kind of laugh at them because I can go to any junction box and there's 5 of them between their office and the, and the actual CO, and I can listen to anything. So while everybody's talking about SRTP, in the real world, it's not really working customer friendly yet. Most likely, by the time it is, if you're running properly TLS end-to-end, certificates for your provisioning, it's probably going to be a compromise at that point. So if you haven't made the jump to doing SRTP and that whole thing, don't freak out and don't think that you need to get there, and don't think it's going to do a whole lot for you. The world just isn't there yet, and especially from the customer provisioning and the customer support standpoint. So other pieces is foreign threats. If you guys are running this, especially hosted providers, a lot of these threats are coming in from overseas. An FBI agent told me the story that if you go to school in China and you're into technology, that your senior paper is often, I'm going to give you a target in the US. Here's the name, here's the information. You're going to find out everything you can about them. And your senior paper is going to be delivering that information back to them. And so a lot of the threats and these attacks and these things that we're seeing hitting our switches, they're just games. They're not real. So for all of those threats on the last slide, most of them are games, most of them are sleeper stuff. The real threats haven't happened yet. So this is just kind of like pretend, get ready. War games, if you guys remember the original type of movie. That's what's going on right now. It's going to get serious in the next 5 years. So if you're ignoring a lot of the security threats, and if you're just being like, oh, well, they just tried this, or it's nothing, I just logged it, I blocked it, get better. Because right now it's playtime. And they're really going to start doing things with this information later. Sleeper software and hardware. How many people are deploying stuff from hardware from China right now? Anybody? I'm sure, come on, everybody raise their hand. So if you look into the government releases, they've, I can't think of the name of telecom, but they, if anybody can think of it, it's Iowa, something like that. Thank you. They've identified chips in there that could have backdoors and sleeper pieces. So I'm sure we're doing it too, but it's a big concern. Nobody's actually really taken apart these devices that we're selling. I'm a huge fan of Yealink. I mean, we sold a lot of Yealink, but do we really know what's inside and what's in there sleeping? And it would be almost impossible to figure out what's going on there. Along with these attacks, the sleeper stuff, if they do gain access to your server, they may just put something on there for later. Just move on and put something on there for later. So we're really worried about chips and devices, especially stuff that's being imported from other countries. We're also really worried about the sleeper software that's being installed on these servers. Patches, extra pieces, you really, really have to be careful what you guys are doing. If you see, hey, they've got somebody that's got a really cool, a compiled piece of code that you want to integrate into your system, be really, really, be really careful is what it comes down to. I already talked about the hijacking of the hosted servers. That's a real deal, and that's happening a lot. So if any of you are back looking at any of the IPs that are hitting you guys, trying to gain access to your stuff, you're probably seeing Rackspace. You're probably seeing the Asia Pacific Network. You're probably seeing a lot of them. So almost all of the domestic-based ones that are based in the US are stolen servers. So all you can really do is set up something to notify the server, the company to take it down. But the damage is already done. I mean, they can get through so many sites by the time somebody actually reports them, they're actually taken down. Who's CLIA compliant? Anybody? Does anybody think they're CLIA compliant? Has anybody had a request from the federal government or from local law enforcement for information for your switch or CLIA access? Did they say you were CLIA compliant? Okay, that's fair. That's what a lot of people do. CLIA compliance, according to the FBI, it's been a real gray area. It's not going to be a real gray area. They basically made the mandate saying that every VoIP provider better get on board. We know nobody's compliant, but you better get there. Yes? It's basically the requirement that all law enforcement can intercept your traffic without notifying you or the end user. So without sending you a subpoena and saying, hey, I want access to that, they're green light giving access to it without saying a word to you or your customer. Well, we already know the NSA is already doing that, but they're not governed by the rules of the US, I guess. But the FBI, local law enforcement, any other kind of national whatever, they have to abide by these rules. And that world is not what you think it is. I mean, if we go back to the 1990s and 1980s, you see the maps on TV, in the movies where they're tracing the call and they're trying to find it, and you see it go across the map in the US. It's not like that. And VoIP has made things super complicated for them. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you've got to get CLIA compliant. And just saying my carrier does it for me, my data center does it for me, isn't going to work. The beauty of VoIP when I got into it in 2003, 2004 is there was no regulation. That's why it was fun. Today, that's why I got out of it, is there's a ton of regulation. It's going to get worse. And that's going to force a lot of people out of this business. So pay attention to these things, get CLIA compliant, look it up. There are certain loopholes that you guys can fall into to be compliant without putting in a compliance agency software or buying a solution. As long as you can dump them the traffic and you can set up something properly, you should be good. But it's going to get worse and they're going to enforce it. So be careful. CDR record maintenance. How long does everybody keep their records? 2 years? 6 months? So let's start. 6 months. Who keeps their CDRs 6 months? Who doesn't keep their CDRs? Let's start there. Okay, that's great. So 6 months or longer? 6 months or longer? A year? 2 years? Indefinitely? Okay, that's good. I mean, when you look from the legal standpoint, forever is not right either. Because any information that you're sitting on, it becomes a compliance issue as far as you run into storing that data. You're now storing metadata indefinitely, which is dangerous in itself. The standard practice is about 2 years. Then archive it off, back it up. But generally the idea is from both the legal counsel that I've talked about with this and the federal government is 2 years. Keep it 2 years. And then don't keep it beyond that. Most lawyers will tell you don't keep any emails beyond a certain amount of time. So the people like me that hoard email for 15 years, that's supposed to be really, really bad from a legal standpoint. So 2 years, you should be good. Customer record maintenance and reporting, yeah. It should be in your, not only as a policy for your business, but it should be in your customer agreements. So that you're letting them know that we are monitoring this data. We are capturing this data and we are storing it for this long. It should be in your terms of service. Just kind of like a CYA type thing. You should keep that. You should notify the customer. You should even notify your vendors and make sure that their requirements. If a lot of SIP providers will require that they'll have in their small print when you sign a contract, you are required to keep this metadata for X amount of time. And it also probably says in their contract they can audit you at any time. So just make sure you're covered on all pieces. So customer records, maintenance, importing an LNP. I know we never did this, but who updates their upstream carrier every time a customer's address changes? You're supposed to. You're in violation of your agreement with them if you don't. But nobody does it. And it also complicates the porting and LNP stuff. The standard practice is you have to respond to a RESPORG or an LNP within 24 to 48 hours. If not, you're in violation of federal law and you're in violation of law with your agreement with your carrier. So it's really important that those emails don't get missed, those contacts don't get missed. When we first started, there was no such thing. They would just yank the number. The CLEC would just take the number away and not tell us, and then we get a notice in the mail 6 weeks later that the customer was just gone. So it's nice that things have improved and that they're including us in this whole game, but you cannot keep a number for any reason. You can't, except for a mismatch of 2 sources or more. Otherwise, you're questionably in violation with the FCC. The other thing is RESPORG stuff. I think the laws have changed a little bit. RESPORG's for 800 numbers. The legalities behind that is you can actually hold a customer for an 800 number contract. So if they're in contract for your services, you don't have to give up, technically by the letter of the law, you don't have to give up that 800 number until they settle that contract. So just kind of a loophole there. Back to the call tracing. A couple of you said you've received subpoenas from the government, local law enforcement, things like that. I had a rude awakening a few years ago. I thought it was so easy that they could just trace the call, find out what was going on, but it's not like that, especially with the VoIP stuff. They actually have to serve a subpoena to every single carrier, and we all know that all the VoIP calls are going back to like 3 or 4 carriers in the US now. I mean, they're controlling everything. Level 3, there's a couple of them out there, but to find that data and find out who it is in the handoffs, They actually, if you have an end user that they've identified as an issue, they'll actually have to give you a subpoena, which generally takes 3 months. Then you have to provide the data, and you have to provide who handed you off that call. Then they subpoena that carrier. And that could be a middle person that's buying from somebody else. That takes so long. And then they have to get that data and pass off who they got that call from and where it came from and who the customer record is. And then they go to the next carrier. I've seen a lot of these subpoena cases go on for over a year, and they still don't know who the end user is. So that's why it's important to store your records. And also be careful who you buy from, because they can, if they're not keeping their records, you could be on the hook. So it's really important that, that's taken care of. HIPAA compliance, things like that. We also like to talk about PCI compliance. Everybody asks you, is voice HIPAA compliant? All voice, even with SRTP, is HIPAA compliant, because HIPAA does not apply to packets that start out in the fashion of voice and translate. However, the faxing is a little different story. Everybody's like, well, what about, I've got eFax. I'm a doctor. I've got eFax. It's not HIPAA compliant. You cannot store that email in your email box, even though it was a physical document. That's how it started. And you store it in your email box. eFax is not HIPAA compliant. You cannot supply a HIPAA compliant eFax solution to a doctor or any other medical piece. But as far as the voice stuff, anytime anybody says, hey, is my voice HIPAA compliant, it doesn't matter what they're running. The way the law is written and the guidelines doesn't apply. So all voice over IP is HIPAA compliant. All traditional telecom is HIPAA compliant as it stands right now. Voicemail to email, things like that, that's a gray area. The general idea behind HIPAA compliance is it started out as a voice signal, so it doesn't apply. If you were to take a physical document and turn it into a digital document, it then falls under the HIPAA compliance guidelines. If it was voice to text, you're fine. But if it was text to speech, you're in a really dangerous gray area. So the other thing that nobody's talking about right now, and the stats on this are really bad, is, and most of you may not even be thinking about this right now, especially from a technical standpoint, but who's liable for what you guys do? If you guys put a phone out on a network with today's laws, and they get breached because that phone gets breached, you're liable. You're equally as liable as they are. So in a lawsuit, in the credit card things that are going on right now, if they were named in a lawsuit and it was found that your device breached their security or assisted in breaching their security, your business is now on the hook. It doesn't matter what your contract says. It doesn't matter what deal you have written out. You are on the hook by the definition. You may not lose in the lawsuit, but you will most likely be named in the lawsuit. So right now, I think last year, people that bought data security or data breach insurance was something like 2 or 3% of the country. By 2020, it's supposed to be over 88%. The policies are coming down. They're getting cheaper. They're getting more comprehensive, and they're getting a larger dollar amount. But who's carrying breach insurance right now? You probably don't want to answer that. You guys all should. That should be the answer. When you go home, that should be the first person. You should call up your insurance company and consult with them immediately. Because if you're not, every single device, every single customer you put out there, if they get breached, you could be on the hook. Whether it's a firewall, whether it's a network switch, whether it's whether it's a phone. Again, we talked about the sleeper chips. We talked about the sleeper code. We talked about all this stuff. If you sold them that device, and if they're paying you to manage that device, you are on the hook in some fashion. So same thing with errors and omissions insurance. Everybody should be carrying it. Like I said, if you're watching the news, you see these data breaches happening almost daily now. Certainly weekly. And yeah, go ahead. It's errors and omissions. It's a type of insurance policy. So if you were to have if you were to write something or write a document that had errors in it, or it was misleading, or if you even wrote code that was misleading, and it covers that. It's that gap between your general liability and your the stuff that you write, basically. In case you made a mistake, in case your tech was on site and made a mistake. If they installed a firewall or a phone and the whole place caught fire, it kind of falls under that along with your general liability. So there's so many things that are not covered by your general liability insurance that you've got to be asking, and you've got to get on top of this kind of stuff. People just aren't asking those questions right now. And if you're touching anything on the customer's premise that has anything to do with their network, you guys really have to, we have to, as a group, get on top of making sure that we're taking care of these kind of things, and making sure you're covered. That's where I was going to go. So these breaches, The big breach that was a couple months ago was Target. So Target didn't initially get breached. It was their cooling vendor that got breached. And they got all the passwords to the systems and the POSs out of their system. Their cooling vendor was something like a 100-employee vendor. Nobody's talking about that company. Everybody's talking about the millions that Target's lost and things like that. That company will probably cease to exist in the coming years. These things won't affect you until you know somebody that's been affected by that. But as we go on, it's kind of like if you guys are familiar with like LifeLock or identity insurance, identity stuff. It's not important to you until it happens to somebody you know. What we're seeing over the next 5 years is you're going to know more and more people that this is happening to, and they're going to lose their businesses. They're going to lose, they're just going to be put out of business. It's just going to be a breach of a credit card security, and the liability associated with it or anything else on the network is so severe. It's not like having somebody break into your office. It's a business ender. And so you really have to be thinking about those things every time you touch anything on the customer's network. Lawsuits, toll charges, things like that. You're also kind of on the hook. If somebody breaches let's say if you're doing a premise-based Asterisk system, you're providing the service, you provided the switch, and they get breached and they have toll fraud. You're kind of on the hook for that too if they decide to sue you. So you got to take an active role and put things in place to make sure that you're taking those things and taking that. And we're running way behind. I'm sorry, guys. So what can you do? Common sense. Most people aren't employing common sense things. The number one thing is do not look like a target. Do not let your customers look like a target. That's the number one thing you can do. Somebody will move on and find an easier target. And so that's what we want to encourage them to. The one thing I can say is stop using port 5060 for everything. Please shut it down. Find something else. And the struggle that we had was the carriers aren't supporting it. So we would go to, we'd have a big carrier and we'd say, hey, we've shut down all 5060 on our system. We'd like you to deliver it on another port. And they said they can't. I think things are getting better in that sense, but you've got to shut down 5060 because the people that are hacking these servers that are scanning, they're just looking for 5060. In 2009, we switched our system to a completely different port. Not one attempt on those switches has happened since that. All we did was change the ports on everything, on the phones, on everything. Other piece, I told you in 10 years we got hacked one time. It was because we put a device, it was a Cisco ATA adapter on a customer's site, didn't have a firewall, web server was open on port 80. So we made two mistakes. One, we let the customer put it in without a firewall. Second thing is we left our default web server on our devices at 80. Big mistake, our fault, we learned our lesson. Change your web server on your devices. Everything's got a web server now. All Polycoms, all Yelinks, all Swams, all Cisco ATs. Change the web server port. Find something random and unique. Do it in the upper band because people aren't going to be scanning those. They take too long. Just put it in your provisioning file. Change your default port on everything across the board. Just make it standard. Make it all standard so your techs know. But just please do not use 80 or 5060 for provisioning stuff. Never, come on, no brainer, never use any default passwords. You're no longer HIPAA compliant if you use the manufacturer's default passwords. So, first and foremost, never do that. Don't have anything, if you can, avoid doing anything in your default contacts. A lot of people still open up an Asterisk box, they open up a free PBX, and they leave a lot of the default settings in there. Next thing is force your users to firewall everything that you put out there. If you're giving a device out there, regardless if you change the port, if you're putting it out there and it's publicly accessible, it can be hacked, it can be compromised. Somebody's going to be looking for it, and again, you're on the hook. So your idea here is to protect the customer from themselves, and in turn, protecting yourself. Always use random password generators for your login IDs, your SIP credentials, anything like that. Just do it. Just build one in, use one, whatever it may take. Just always, always use random. What's that? 5. Okay, we're moving through. All right. Something also stupid common sense, don't host your website in the same place as your VoIP switch. Because if somebody's looking for you for a target, they just found you. Put it somewhere else. Lock down your APIs. Run layer 2 filtering switches in front of everything. Run dual networks. If you're a hosted provider, have a public network, have a private network. On your public network, only allow what's absolutely necessary accessible. Run a private MPLS, VPN, whatever it is on a private side of the network where your management side is. Stay away from stuff. Use DNS SRV. Shift traffic around, things like that. Do private DNS. So we used to use DNS SRV, but we don't use it publicly, or we didn't use it publicly. We had our own private network of DNS servers that weren't out there, so nobody could find our domains. And use alternative domains. Don't use your company name or your company domains as you're provisioning your DNS SRV stuff. Why would you give somebody a roadmap on how to hack your network? Set up another big thing with your upstream providers, set up small increments of auto pay for your termination. Because what happened with us, anytime that we saw a lot of mass usage, we get a lot of emails. Hey, I just got one the other day. What's going on? What's going on? It gives you, kind of a little bit more control, and things don't get out of hand. Short repay things like that. Work Asterisk backwards. Remove everything, and then put in what you only need. A lot of people don't clear out the modules. A lot of people have all this stuff open. Just learn it. Start over. Start completely clean. Put in what you only need. Nmap and port scan your stuff if you can weekly. But at the very least, you need to audit your stuff every month. Again, stop provisioning TFTP and HTTP. Use HTTPS. Use certificate-based provisioning. Cool tools that you guys should really get on board with is fail2ban, which is a great tool that lets you automatically scans the Asterisk log. If there's too many attempts, it'll automatically ban the system via IP tables, and they're effectively no longer scanning your stuff, trying to attempt logins anymore. Use a centralized banning. We did that, and you guys can talk to us if you want. We just set up something that was an API that everybody could use, so we could all be on the same page. If you got hacked or somebody was scanning your system, it would put up on this ban list. It would work like the old IP or the old mail filtering software, ban list type things. Use PaperTrail and PagerDuty. That way you're notified. You got centralized logging. Everything from all your servers, even from your customers if you're premise-based, logs it to one place. If there's an issue or a lot of repetition, a lot of errors, you're going to get notified. It's really great tools. Use Nagios for monitoring, of course. And another great tool is Cacti for Asterisk MRTG. You can see what's going on, how many SIP channels, how many IX channels, how many PRI channels. It gives you an idea, and you can actually graph trends. And a lot of times we had issues, we'd be able to find it through those tools. Think about the what ifs because they quickly become what becomes. Use common sense. I've got a bunch of tools that I developed for Asterisk through the years. We've got like a free voicemail transcription. We've got free 411 type of stuff that would just dip public APIs and things that you can sign up for free. I've got on my GitHub, so if you guys have time, check them out, download them, play with them. Just something that I did through the years. You're free to use them and do what you guys want, but there's no support or anything for them. So I know we're out of time. If you guys have any questions real quick, do we have any time for any questions? Great. Thanks, guys.
Any questions?
The tools which tools? The actual server tools or the? They're on my GitHub. So which is a code repository. It's under my username, which is that right there.
Any other questions?
Anybody?
You've answered all of their questions.
There's a lot. There's definitely a lot more that I haven't covered. But the thing that I want to really push on everybody, go home and ask questions to your professionals. Talk to your lawyers. Talk to your local law enforcement. Talk to your insurance people. I guarantee you that not everybody is where they should be, and things are going to get serious in the next 5 years. Thanks, guys.